Hello students, hope you are thorough with the previous video where you have learnt about the divisions of nervous system followed by the protective membrane of the brain followed by spinal cord, that is meninges. Now let us start learning about the external structure of the human brain. So when you look at the human brain externally, it comprises three parts such as cerebrum, cerebellum and medulla oblongata. Now let us start with the cerebrum. Yes children, here you can look at the diagram of the human brain. So cerebrum is the largest part of the human brain, and in order to identify the cerebrum, we can observe that this cerebrum has a number of convolutions. So one of the way to identify the cerebrum is that it has a number of convolutions. Children, I think already you are familiar with the word convolutions. It means it is highly folded structure. So when you look at the cerebrum can be divided into two parts, or you can say that here I have just taken the capsicum. So just compare the capsicum to the human brain. So just now I said that the cerebrum can be divided into two parts. So when I separate or when I dissect this capsicum, you can find two parts. So in the same way, the cerebrum has two parts, one onto the right side, the other one to the left side. So we call these two parts of the cerebrum as a right cerebrum followed by left cerebrum, or we name it as a cerebral hemispheres. So thus you can say that cerebrum has two parts known as a cerebral hemispheres. This cerebrum, I said, it has a number of convolutions. What do you mean by convolutions? So if you look at this structure itself, there is a elevated structure. This elevated structure, you can call it as a ridge, and you can find this depressions. So these depressions are known as grooves, and this is a ridge. So you can find one more ridge, one more groove, ridge followed by a groove. So in the same way, you can also find the ridge and groove in your palm. So you can find these lines are the grooves and these elevated structures are the ridges. In the same way, cerebrum has a number of ridges. So what I am showing you is a ridge, right? And it also has a number of depressions. So these are the depressions. What I am showing you with the pink color is the depressions, or what do we call it as a grooves, right children? So thus you can say that the cerebrum has a number of convolutions, and the convolutions comprise two structures. What did I call those structures as? The depressions are known as a grooves and the elevated parts are known as a ridges. So what do we call these grooves as? The grooves are known as sulci. Sulci is the plural form. The singular form is sulcus. So each groove is known as a sulcus. A number of grooves are known as a sulci. And then the ridges. The ridges are known as gyri, which is the plural form, and gyrus is the singular form. So thus you can say that the cerebrum comprises a number of sulci and gyri. So what is the meaning of a sulci? Sulci means grooves. Gyri means ridges. Yes, children? Why do we have a number of convolutions or a number of grooves or ridges in case of a cerebrum? This is in order to accommodate more number of neurons. So if you have a plain surface of the cerebrum, you can accommodate only few neurons, right? Okay, but if you have a ridges along with the grooves, you can accommodate more number of neurons, right? So in order to provide a larger surface area and to accommodate more number of neurons, in order to carry out the function effectively, the cerebrum has a number of convolutions. Yes, children. So this can be one of the question asked for the give reason. The cerebrum has a number of convolutions. So where you have to answer 2 sentences. So because of a high, more number of convolutions, it provides a larger surface area so that and many number of neurons can be accommodated in this. Many number of neurons can be accommodated in the convolutions. So you can say that there are number of, or you can say millions of neurons in the cerebrum performing a number of functions. Children, if you look at the cerebral hemisphere, in fact, each cerebral hemisphere is hollow internally. It is similar to this capsicum. Okay, so internally each cerebral hemisphere has a hollow space filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Right? Now, similar to the kidney, even the cerebrum has 2 regions. So similar to the kidney, even the cerebrum has 2 regions. So what do we call those 2 regions as? It has an outer cortex and inner medulla. So you can say that just like the kidney, even the cerebrum has a outer cortex region and inner medulla. So how do we identify this cortex or a medulla region? Outer cortex is actually gray in its coloration. So when you look at the outer cortex has a gray in its coloration, and since it is gray in its color, we call that part as a gray matter. Okay, so what do we find in this gray matter? In fact, in the gray matter of the cerebrum, we find the cytons of all the nerve cells. So in the gray matter, we find the cytons of all the nerve cells. Okay, and then in the inner medulla, it is white in its coloration, and hence we call it as a white matter. And this whiteness of the inner medulla is due to the presence of axons in this region. So if you remember, the axons are covered by a myelin sheath, right children? And because of the myelin sheath, it gives it imparts a white coloration to the inner medulla region. So cerebrum has 2 regions known as a outer cortex which is also known as a gray matter, which is grayish in color due to the presence of cytons, and the inner region is known as a medulla region, which is in white color due to the presence of axons. Yes, children, this can be one of the question asked in the exam. They'll ask you, how are the neurons arranged in the brain or in the cerebrum? So you have to use 6 words. Okay, what are those 6 words? It has an outer cortex, gray matter, which is gray in color containing cytons, and inner medulla, which is white in color and contains the axons of nerve cells. Yes, children. So thus you can say that the cerebrum has cerebral hemispheres along with these 2 regions known as the outer cortex along with inner medulla. So I said that there are 2 cerebral hemispheres, but both these 2 regions are in fact interconnected. So whatever the impulses that are conducted to the right side, it is passed to the left hand side, or from a left hand side to the right side. Or you can say that the 2 cerebral hemispheres are connected to each other. They are connected to each other by a special set of nerve fibers. So we find a sheet of nerve fibers which is connecting the right cerebral hemisphere to the left cerebral hemisphere. So this sheet of nerve fibers which connects the right cerebrum to the left cerebrum or vice versa, we call this structure as a corpus callosum. So what is the location of a corpus callosum? Corpus callosum is a sheet of nerve fibers. So it is a sheet of nerve fibers which connects the right cerebrum to the left cerebrum, which connects the right cerebrum to the left cerebrum, or vice versa. If they ask you the function of a corpus callosum, yes children, I think I have taught you in the earlier videos, when they ask you the function, you have to use the word conduction of impulses, right? So you can say that, what is the function of corpus callosum? Corpus callosum helps in the conduction of nerve impulses from the right cerebrum to the left cerebrum. So thus, this sheet of nerve fibers known as a corpus callosum helps in conduction of impulses from one part of the cerebrum to the other part of the cerebrum. Yes children, this is about the structure of the cerebrum. Now, what about the function? In fact, when you look at your skull, here I've just taken a statue, okay? So where you can see the skull, now I can say that the cerebrum can be divided into 4 parts, right? The region which is close to the forehead, we call it as a frontal lobe. So this region, what do we have? We name it as a frontal lobe. Okay. So thus you can say that the cerebrum has a 4 lobes. The cerebrum has a 4 lobes. There are 4 lobes in the cerebrum. What are those 4 lobes? The first lobe is known as a frontal lobe, right? So where do we have a frontal lobe? We have a frontal lobe very close to the forehead. So this is a region where we have a frontal lobe. Just behind the frontal lobe, we find one more region. This is a region, and this is the region, what do we call it as a parietal lobe. What do we name it as a? We name it as a parietal lobe. So this is a region, what do we call it as a? Parietal lobe. Right? Just behind the parietal lobe, if you remember children, last year you have learnt about the foramen magnum, right? The hole through which the brain continues as a spinal cord. So this region of the skull, we name it as a occipital lobe. What do we call it as? We name it as a occipital lobe. So thus you can say that the cerebrum has 4 lobes. This is the frontal lobe, which is very close to the forehead. Behind the frontal lobe, we find the parietal lobe. And behind the parietal lobe, that is very close to the foramen magnum, that is at the back of the skull, we find the occipital lobe. Along with that, we find one more region known as a temporal lobe. What do we call it as? Temporal lobe, which is very, very close to your ears. So the region just behind ears, the region behind your ears is known as a temporal lobe. Yes, children. So thus you can divide cerebrum into 4 regions known as frontal lobe, which is close to the forehead, followed by parietal lobe, which is just behind the frontal lobe, and behind the parietal lobe we find the occipital lobe. This is the occipital lobe, and just behind your ears we find the temporal lobe. So in all these lobes we have a number of neurons performing their functions, right? Now take an example. We have certain neurons in the temporal lobe which are meant for hearing. So whatever the sound to which we hear, so we have a special neurons here which are carrying the impulses to the brain and which are in turn responding to the sound waves. So again, in the occipital lobe we have a special neurons which are responding to the vision, or whatever we look at the objects, all those impulses are carried to the occipital lobe, and these neurons in the occipital lobe respond to those stimuli. And you can say that here in the parietal lobe we have certain neurons which are responsible for the movement. Yes, children, we know that we walk, we climb down the staircase, we climb up the staircase. All those muscular movements are actually because of the neurons which are found in the parietal lobe, or you can say that the voluntary actions, all those actions carried out by the skeletal muscles, actually the impulse for all those actions originate in the cerebrum. So you can say that, so it is a region where all those impulses are brought about and it is conducted to the skeletal muscles to carry out your muscular movements. Again in the frontal lobe, yes children, you can say this is a region meant for thinking, it's a region meant for your memory, it's a region meant for your speech, smell, taste, that is various sensations of your sense organs are actually experienced because of these neurons which are found in the frontal lobe, right? So whenever a teacher asks you certain tricky questions, you are able to answer because of the frontal lobe, the specialized neurons. There we have a specialized neurons which are meant for thinking, your language, skills and so on. Now let us learn about cerebellum. Before we could learn about the cerebellum, children, let us also learn about one more function of cerebrum. Probably you have heard about unconscious mind, or what do we call it as a subconscious mind. So cerebrum has a region of a subconscious mind. Whenever we have a sound sleep, we get dreams, and probably in the dreams you would have experienced that you are jumping from a hill, or you are running behind a thief, or you are running here and there, and you experience all those imaginations. And how do you get those dreams? All those dreams are because of the experiences, or all your thoughts have been stored in the cerebrum, which appears as a dream whenever you have a sound sleep. So what do we call it as a unconscious mind or a subconscious mind? Okay, so along with this, even the cerebrum is meant for various things. It helps us to invent, it helps us to plan out various things, it helps us in reasoning, right? We are able to crack many number of competitive exams. It's because of the cerebrum, which helps us in thinking. So, but in general, if they ask you about the function of cerebrum, you can say that cerebrum is a seat of memory, seat of intelligence, or can also call it as a seat of willpower. So there is no need to explain all the functions. So in general, if they ask you about the function of cerebrum, you can only say it as a seat of memory, intelligence and willpower. So we find the cerebrum just below the cranium. So under the cranium we find this cerebrum. Yes, children. Now let us learn about the cerebellum. So which is the second part of the human brain. So where do we find this cerebellum? So cerebellum is also known as a small brain, which also has two parts similar to the cerebrum. So we can name those two parts as a right cerebellum followed by left cerebellum. So just like the right cerebrum, we have a right cerebellum, and like the left cerebrum, we have a left cerebellum. So where do we have this cerebellum? The cerebellum is situated under the large cerebrum. So it is found at the base and under the large cerebrum. So what is the location of cerebellum? The location of cerebellum is, it is at the base and under the large cerebrum. And this cerebellum also has outer grey matter. It has an outer grey matter containing cell bodies, followed by inner white matter comprising axons. And if you look at the inner white matter appears like a branching tree. So when you just observe the internal structure of a cerebellum, the internal structure of a cerebellum, it appears like a branching tree. It is due to the presence of the white matter containing axons. So what are the functions of cerebellum? The cerebellum has two functions. It has two functions. The first function is it helps in balancing our body. So it helps in balancing our body. So whenever we are walking, standing, climbing down the staircase, so it helps us to balance our body, does not allow our body to have a fall. Along with that, it also brings about one more function, that is helps in the coordination of muscular activity. It helps in bringing about coordination of our muscles. Children, just few minutes back I taught you that in the parietal lobe we have a neurons which are meant for muscular activity. So it means the impulse for the muscular activity actually originates in cerebrum. So don't have a confusion. So cerebrum is actually meant for initiating the muscular activity, or the impulse for the muscular activity actually originates in the cerebrum, but cerebellum brings about the coordination of muscular activity. So what is the meaning of a coordination? It is nothing but it is relevant to the contraction and relaxation of muscles. So whenever you are walking or whenever you are taking part in the running race, your muscles of hands, legs, arms undergo contraction followed by relaxation. So this contraction followed by relaxation is actually brought about by the cerebellum. So that is the reason I said you should use the word coordination of muscles, right? So what are the two functions of cerebellum? Cerebellum helps in balancing our body, followed by brings about the coordination of muscular activity. So probably you would have seen an alcoholic person cannot walk properly. So this can be one of the expected question for a give reason. So why he cannot walk properly? It's because the cerebellum is under the influence of alcohol. So when he consumes the alcohol enters into his cerebellum, and since it is under the influence of alcohol, he cannot balance his body, followed by he cannot have a proper coordination of muscles, due to which he cannot walk properly. He walks actually clumsily, right? Yes, so this is about the second part of the human brain. Now let us learn about the third part of the human brain. The last part is actually the medulla oblongata. So the third part of the human brain is the medulla oblongata. So we call this medulla oblongata. Now we find this medulla oblongata at the base of the skull. So what is the location of medulla oblongata? It is found at the base of the skull. Children, so whenever you learn the locations as given in the textbook. So what is the location of the medulla oblongata? It is found at the base of the skull. We also call this medulla oblongata as a stem of the brain. So as we name the cerebellum as a small brain or a little brain, in the same way the medulla oblongata is named as a stem of the brain found at the base of the skull. So if you look at the medulla oblongata, it is roughly triangular in its shape, right? So what is the shape of the medulla oblongata? It is roughly triangular in its shape. So what are the functions of medulla oblongata? In fact, children, medulla oblongata controls all the internal controls all the internal organs of the body, or the internal activities of the body are actually carried out by the medulla oblongata. Yes? So what do you mean by internal activity? Probably you know, we have a number of involuntary muscles which are found in our heart, lungs, alimentary canal, kidney and so on. What do we call it as the internal organs of the body which work all by themselves. They are not under our control. So all those functions of internal organs such as breathing, working of the heart, okay, that is a production of heartbeat, followed by the movement of food in the alimentary canal. What do we call it as a peristalsis of food in the alimentary canal, along with the passage of urine in our urinary system. So all these are the functions which are carried out by the involuntary muscles, right? So all these functions are carried out by the medulla oblongata. So in case if they ask you about the function of medulla oblongata, you have to mention it helps in controlling all the internal organs of the body, along with two examples. You have to write two examples in that function, right? Then children, probably you would have seen a person who rides the vehicle without the helmet, and if he happens to have a accident, and in case if he has a head injury, there are chances for the person to have a death on the spot. So if there is a head injury, and especially if there is a injury to the medulla oblongata, the person dies on the spot, or he dies instantaneously. The reason behind this spot death is the medulla oblongata, which controls all the internal organs of the body, is injured, due to which he dies on the spot. Yes, children, with this we complete the external structure of the human brain. So learn it thoroughly, go through the textbook, go through the diagrams given in the textbook, okay, and you can understand in a better way. Thank you.